podcast. I am your host, John Keene. As always, I would like to thank you guys for joining me. As such, you please add, follow, and check us out. Instagram, Facebook, Best Damn Podcast, Twitter, The Real Best Damn. And wherever you guys are watching and you catch us from, please make sure to hit the follow, the like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you'd like to financially support us, it'd be graciously appreciated. You can do so by going to PayPal, Cash App, Facebook Messenger, or by joining us over on Patreon. And I do want to ask all of you guys to please consider donating, supporting. It is how we're able to continue to create, and it's greatly appreciated. So I decided to do an early one here today. And really I thought the best way to really get into this was just to really talk about some of the things that I've been studying and looking into lately. But if you do catch us live, please make sure to hit the thumbs up on the chat. It helps with the algorithms and all that good stuff. But I mean, we're to a point now to where there is really, and with the Charlie Kirk stuff and all the things that are taking place in the media, I feel like it's become extremely oversaturated, to where I've gotten fatigued just, about the topic, in particular. And this is where they take things, when it comes to every single topic, every single news story, every single event that's taking place. It's like eventually we always reach this point to where we're just totally wiped out on the subject, and it's like we no longer care, we no longer want to see any more of it, right? It becomes like we're nauseated at the sight of the story, or even the mention of the story. Charlie Kirk being no different. And a lot of reasons that they do this is, and they pound us with this, not only because, is mind control and brainwashing, the most effective by the practice of repetition, right? Repetition is how, you're able to drill a message down and to really, get something to stick. Is like, you've even heard the saying probably, you can repeat a lie enough times and then it becomes a truth. This is actually how history, has happened, where they have told us different narratives, whether they be false or actual reality. It doesn't matter. It's now become what we put in every textbook. It's now become the official narrative and the official story of every person across the globe, especially in some situations and scenarios. Look at like World War II, for instance. There wasn't even 6 million Jewish people living in Germany, but we've been given the narrative that, the Holocaust killed 6 million people. So that's the narrative that we go with. We don't really look at the statistics or, what is factual or, anything that adds up at this point. It's like if it gets repeated enough, it becomes a truth. Same thing with COVID, Well, vaccines are safe and effective, and, and you hear this repeated over and over and over, and this is what got, a lot of people to fall for that in the first place, Not just that, but fear. Fear and panic. This is also a large motivator of the population. So we see this with the whole Charlie Kirk story. We've one thing it was meant to do was through fear, kind of like make people question or hesitate, whether or not they should speak out or they should speak the truth when it comes to certain things. Because it's like, hey, look, this guy was speaking out, or this guy was talking about, certain topics, right? Israel in particular. He started to shift his political views and his viewpoints on Israel shortly before his death. And I use my air fingers for death because I don't believe that in, and I know our eyes can deceive us sometimes, and I believe none of what my eyes see, if it's on a television, if it's part of a production, but it's to make us question and second guess ourselves, like, hey, this guy got killed, for speaking the truth. This guy got killed for speaking about his beliefs. This guy got killed, and it's to make us hesitant and fearful. That way we don't want to face that same consequence, that same action, as a result of us speaking, against the system, or speaking against the agendas that are taking place. And then, it has the other effect too. It's like you can use this as a martyr. Now this gives them a lot of political steam, because you think about it, there's so much emotion, when it comes to like a death or situations surrounding death, people getting killed, especially publicly. There was like this outpouring of grief and emotion, and people are incredibly sad and moved by the situation. Not just that, but you had a large variety of people that were extremely angry with all of this as well, right? Like, and with all that emotion, it comes energy. Remember, emotion is just energy in motion, And in the occult, and in these practices, these rituals, that's what they're in the business of, is moving and manipulating energy, using the energy of the masses in order to accomplish certain goals. And remember, the ends justify the means. There was so much symbolism, and this is something I was recently studying too, and I find it to be incredibly interesting with 33 and all that. We'll get into that in just a second. Charlie Kirk, he had the black and white t-shirt on that particular day, and freedom, and I told you guys about the numerology and how all of that adds up to 33, right? And the black and white, black is 11, white is 11 in Masonry, and you see the black and white checkerboard floor, within Freemasonry, which, they love to show the polar opposites and duality, because these energies in opposition, don't know what that was, but energies in opposition, right? But okay, just making sure I'm not getting shot over here. But we had the 33 energy. He had the 47 hats in front of him, right? The 347 hats. 4 plus 7 is 11. 11 times 3 is 33. I was looking up, the number for a lot of this, and in Thelemic magic, right, the number 333, right, and we had that 33 symbolism. Remember, 33 hours after all of this took place, that's when they allegedly found the manhunt for Tyler Robinson. It was like, 33 hours later, we've now found the guy, Tyler Robinson. You remember, they were saying the 33, they were pointing that out, on television. That was incredibly intentional. And I believe the entity's name is Choronzon. Choronzon is spelled Choronzon. Choronzon. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But in Thelema, and his number is 333, and we know that in Masonry, the 33 and all of this, right? But 333 is the number of this, and this entity goes back to John Dee, right? And the Enochian magic and all of that. But Aleister Crowley, in the Book of Lies, I believe, Liber 333 wrote about Choronzon as well. And 33 and 333 synonymous. This entity apparently represents it's a necessary evil. Basically, this is what the number kind of symbolizes, and the entity kind of symbolizes, like, a necessary evil. And he's also like the guardian of the abyss. So he is the last stage before an adept reaches illumination, right? This Choronzon or Choronzon entity is the last step before an adept reaches illumination, right? Within the abyss, which, in the occult, this represents, the need to destroy the ego, right? Basically, like to overcome the ego, to overcome the self, right? In order to reach this higher stage of illumination, right? But it can also you know, represent like a necessary conflict or, you know, a necessary loss or a necessary hardship as well. And remember, like when it comes to all of this too, one of the, you know, the sayings, the coined phrases is the ends justifying the means, you know, ends justifying the means. So when you take that concept of like, you know, some type of necessary evil or necessary conflict or necessary loss, if you will, right? And you apply that, you know, it fits perfectly, you know, with the whole Charlie Kirk thing. You know, it's like basically this necessary sacrifice that must be made in order to gather steam. And they're using that emotional energy, you know, to launch the movement forward, you know. To launch the movement forward. And you can tell it was incredibly ritualized, you know, by, you know, the venue that they chose for it to happen in. You know, like I said, the symbolism that was, you know, in place in all directions, you know, the 47 hats, the 33, the black and white t-shirt, freedom being written on the t-shirt, all these different, you know, aspects. You could tell this was incredibly occultic in that, you know, it had a large amount of numerology and a symbolism just embedded in it deeply, right? And anytime you see like Donald Trump's Secret Service, you know, standing, you know, standing next to the dude, you know something's up, right? The Secret Service don't fuck around, you know, and they are, you know, they are incredibly adept at, you know, I'm sure a variety of things, right? And false flag events and all of that, I'm sure, you know, fall under the range of duties that they're able to achieve, you know. And isn't it funny that, you know, that particular bodyguard, you know, that was wearing the smart glasses that was behind him, you know, which was also at the Butler, Pennsylvania Donald Trump assassination attempt, is also there at the Charlie Kirk assassination. You know, both of which I think were completely staged productions, might I add. You know, I showed an angle on Facebook, you know, of the Donald Trump assassination attempt, and I used my quote fingers there, and it's like you could literally see the guys. They had the cameras all ready, and as soon as it happens, they lower down the flag and shit and wait till it gets into position in order, like, and they're just moving slowly. The shit was just so fake. So fake. It's not funny. And it's like, are we even surprised about all this? I mean, you know, Donald Trump was doing, you know, WWE and shit years ago. So, I mean, he's definitely skilled in doing this as well. You know, and then when Erica Kirk comes out and she's got fucking pyrotechnics and shit flying like she's walking onto the WWE, it's like that right there was your clue that something was way off with all of this. Way off with all of this. You know. And I seen a side-by-side comparison to JFK's wife, right? And her grieving and the funeral or memorial of JFK, which was a King Kill assassination, you know, in the occult. And if you don't know anything about the King Kill assassination, I'm telling you, go look that shit up. That is a deep rabbit hole that will blow your mind, you know. Matter of fact, you know, and which has incredible 33 symbolism as well, right? The King Kill is all about the 33. That's why it happened in Dallas, Texas on the 33rd parallel, right? JFK had the number 33 all through his shit, like, so the King Kill, and even with his assassin, was it Lee Harvey Oswald? You know, the autopsy of him, there is a ritualistic way they do the autopsy, which there's been a few King Kill sacrifices over the years. King Von, the rapper, was another King Kill sacrifice. And he had an autopsy done on him the same way that they did Lee Harvey Oswald, which is an old ancient Egyptian ritualistic practice, right, of necromancy. And they would take the body and they would cut it like a Y, you know, It's basically like this particular autopsy. It's like they they have the hands up like you're being crucified, and the body gets split like a Y. It's very gross looking and crazy, but that's one of the particular methods of autopsy. And you see that particular autopsy and ritualistic sacrifices take place, right? And they did that autopsy to Lee Harvey Oswald. Same way with King Von, and how do I know this? Well, because we live in the age of social media, and King Von's autopsy photos was actually leaked out to the public. And when I say leaked out to the public, I mean they did that intentionally, right? Because they need eyes and they need attention, on what's taking place. Because if they don't have it, right, it doesn't have any occultic power. They need that energy in order for for it to really have the gas or whatever, the juice, in order to be able to. Hey, how's it going? It's my neighbor. They need that energy in order for it to have the gas or the juice, to push that energy or use that energy towards some means, And this is what they do a lot of times. It's like you think about, entities that are harvesting, energy or whatever, right? Like, and a lot of people have different concepts on what they talk about is like loose harvesting and, intradimensional species that are actually, feeding off of us. Demonic entities that are feeding off of us, And I feel like the New Age is totally packed full of those entities, and people don't even have any idea that they're worshiping those entities. And I'll give you just one example, just right off at the top. Like, how a lot of people talk about the ancient Atlanteans and Lemurians, right? One of the things I just recently learned when I'm like doing research, I think I heard it like mentioned in a podcast I was watching, so I went and like looked the shit up and did this major deep dive into it. But where we get the whole sense of like Lemuria, right? But where we get the whole thing of Lemuria, right? Lemuria actually, and this is strange, a lemur or lemur, right? I don't know exactly how you pronounce the word, but that's how it's spelled, lemur. In ancient Rome was a disembodied restless spirit. So it's like you look at like the New Age and how we're talking about these ancient civilizations and cultures, like such things as like the Atlanteans, right? And we know that like Atlantean means of Atlas, right? Or of the Atlantis, right? Like which goes into a whole nother rabbit hole, right? With Plato's Atlantis and all of that, which I've done videos on before, and the sons of Atlantis and all of that. But the whole Lemur and the Lemurians, right? This is a disembodied entity, and one of the techniques, and I find it to be interesting because they said that these entities, actually the Lemurians, like lived in the Bronze Age or whatever, right? Which gets into the blue bloods and copper and all of that. But one of the ways that they used to, in the cult of Jupiter, that they would be able to get rid of these entities or these spirits, these lemurs, is by banging copper, right? For whatever reason, the vibration of the copper would make the disembodied spirits scramble in fear. And I find that to be strange, right? Think about like sound bowls and shit like that, right? Use like a Tibetan singing bowl and all that, sound bowl, that brass or copper or whatever. It's brass, excuse me. But the brass, vibrates, giving off this harmonic resonance or frequency, this vibration, that you can literally feel throughout the entirety of your body. And it has a spiritual connotation. I know that, different practices as well, like meditations of many sorts. In fact, the Gateway Experience, if you guys are familiar with the Gateway Experience by the Monroe Institute, which was, funded by the CIA in the 1980s, right, in order to tap into, advanced expressions of consciousness or higher states of consciousness. You know, in that particular exercise, one of the ways that you get yourself gassed up in order to like shift into that higher vibrational state is by humming, right? Like making that vibration, like, and you see this, what is it, the Tibetan monks that do it in their throat and all different types of ways like that. So you can see where like vibration does have an effect on consciousness, considering, sound, right? Like we sing when we're in church and all of this. So, and this is the same thing with the bells. It's like you look in like the different Tartarian mythos and conspiracies around Tartaria, how all of the bells were removed during the world wars, right? And that these bells that were in these towns and these cities, that they were actually put in place, to ward off evil spirits, right? So whenever like a fucking weirdo or, a magician, a witch, whatever would come into your town, right? Allegedly these bells, they give off this vibration or a frequency that, disrupts that, it disrupts that. And I'm pretty sure, I was watching a video on like the cymatic plates where it's like they would take sand and they put it on these plates and they would vibrate, using different frequencies. And bells were actually like the tone of bells when they would ring would come up into like the formations of crosses. They would be like the equivalents to the name of Jesus and all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, like there really is, like I'm sure it, if we really done a majorly deep dive on that, we would find there's, a lot more to that than what people think. And that's probably why, the reason why so many of the bells were removed, during the world wars. And you look at like the Liberty Bell, which has an identical one in Moscow, Russia, right? And how it has a crack in it, right? It has a crack in it, And that kind of makes you think like, why? Kind of makes you think like, why would Liberty Bell, be represented, as having a crack in it, right? And it's like, it kind of makes you think of like the whole modern age and our concept of liberty and freedom and, how far off we really are. And it's like, you look at like Tartarian conspiracy in general, and it's like, it really brings me to is like, we have this idea, that we were far more advanced and all of this and that, civilization was way more ahead technologically than what it is now. And I agree with that. But here's the thing, in the Bible, it tells us that these things are true as well, but when we look at Tartaria, you got to think of the word here, right? Like Tartarus in the Greeks was hell, that was hell. So the Tartarians, and their flag was represented with like the griffin on it or whatever, the griffith, that same eagle-headed shit that you see of the ancient Sumerians and Mesopotamians and all of this that we know as the fallen angels, So when we look at like Tartaria and all of this, I know a lot of people want to try to like, make it sound as if we were like once some great, loving, beautiful society and they're hiding it all from us and the technology's all being hidden and we were so advanced. It's like, nah, I don't really think so. I think that was actually fallen angel technology and we just found it after, the last catastrophe, after the last cycle ended, the shit was just left remaining, still here, and that's why they would have like the whole founders laws on everything. People would, building would be founded in 1908, meaning they found that motherfucker, right? And they were the first person to find it. They didn't actually build it or create it, right? And they were using technology. And if you look back to like the stories of Atlantis and all of that, what happened with them was, you know, essentially they tapped into something that, you know, destroyed them. They were fucking around with technology that they had no business fucking around, you know? And many people tell versions of the story where these Atlanteans, there were essentially two, you know, cliques of them, two groups of them, you know, one group being more positive and then the other being into some darker shit. And the ones that were into the darker stuff, there we go. The ones that were into the darker stuff, like, you know, they essentially created some tear or hole in space and time, and this tear, you know, ultimately allowed, you know, interdimensional entities, you know, to flow in, you know, and that's what that's where we get the modern day demons and all of that. It's like, you know, I don't know how many people believe that or buy that story, but you know, that's one of the versions of that, you know, is that you know, they were messing around with things they shouldn't have been messing with, you know. And I've even heard different theories being posited, such as like, you know, that where we're like storing data and shit like that through technology, that data actually has mass to it, right? And even though you can't see it, whenever you have like you know, say an external hard drive, right, that has the ability to store like 1 terabyte of information, of data or whatever, right, that you know, when you have data on it, that it actually does gain mass and weighs more, right? Like it weighs more than it originally weighed before you had anything on there to start with. And that even though you erase it or can delete the data, it's still in the ether somewhere, right? And that this mass has some sort of gravity, and that this might actually be the explanation of dark matter, you know, is like this information or this mass or whatever, you know, from data. And that this information and this mass could be like the reason of why like the earth is essentially, you know, getting bigger, and the universe is expanding, and there's, you know, this mass kind of like theory that goes into, you know, this could actually eventually have the gravity of like a black hole, or the weight of like a black hole, and be enough to destroy the earth, you know. And quite possibly this could be one of the reasons what, you know, what actually happened to the Atlanteans or civilizations in the past. You know, they hit like their information peak, if you will, you know. And if we're living in some sort of simulation, you know, that means there would be like a finite amount of information or data that was, you know, allowable, I guess. And it's like once you hit that, you know, things go out of balance, you know, and it creates magnetic reversal and all these different things. And it's nice to see you. Thank you for joining. Which I'm going to start doing my lives over on Facebook now, honestly. So make sure you follow me over there. Just to be honest, you know, YouTube is just so dead, and every time I go there, man, I just have so much trouble getting YouTube to work correctly, and just all of that. It's like, you know, and I got a way larger reach over on Facebook, so make sure you follow me there, because for now on, that's where I'm going to be doing my lives from. I'll still try to post over here occasionally, you know. But it's like you really think about, you know, think about our reality in general, you know, and how everything seems to be like a production, a show, you know, down to the Donald Trump assassination like attempt, You know, it's like that was clearly theatrics, that was clearly fake, you know, that wasn't real. And we all know it wasn't real, you know, to the entire, you know, Charlie Kirk thing. It's like literally as the guy was walking up, and there's like footage that's coming out, and I don't know the name, and I'm sure one of you guys that are watching this, I'm sure one of you guys that are watching this would be able to identify the guy. But he was, he's essentially, and he was walking with Charlie Kirk up to the event that day, right? And there's film of it, and he was actually there, you know, talking to police and shit like that before the event actually took place. But he's like a specialist in, if for the neck at that, a special effects makeup artist, and he specializes in like neck wounds, you know, like using blood squibs and all of that. God, I cannot think of the guy's name to save my life, but he was walking up with Charlie Kirk that day, and it just so happens that he's like the, you know, the forerunner of special effects makeup that, you know, and specializes in neck wounds. And then when you look at like the exploding mic theory, you know, where, you know, Stu Peters' network came out with the lavalier mic theory, right? Where he's like, yeah, Charlie Kirk had his lavalier mic was an explosive device. And it's like, how convenient that theory also is in a couple ways. One, it supports the narrative that Israel did it, right? We already know that Israel had the exploding pagers and blew a bunch of guys' cocks off, you know. What was that, last year before, or whatever, right? So it's like we already know that happened. That's a fact. Like they blew a bunch of their enemies' dicks off with exploding pagers. So they're already known for having exploding devices. Charlie Kirk had Israeli security, you know, put two and two together. You can see the video of the dude in the brown shirt, and he's literally got the square device that looks like a pack of cigarettes, you know, under his sleeve or whatever. And the motherfucker, right in unison, as the shit explodes under his shirt, taps it like he's doing it. And not just that, the guy goes, you know, takes it a level further. You know, this is what's crazy. 5 minutes before the event happens, he holds up his hand like this, like 5, right? Like saying like 5 minutes. And that's when you see the Secret Service agent that was there during the Trump assassination attempt wearing the smart glasses actually turn on the smart glasses, right? And clicks them on at 5 minutes. Then at 4 minutes, you see the guy raise his hand up like 4, right? Then at 3 minutes, he does something totally different, right? He holds his hand up and he says 3, but he points to his watch. And at that time, you can see everyone around Kirk, everyone, literally check their watch because they're synchronizing their watches, right? You know, and then the guy steps up to the microphone. It's the fat kid that's talking about the transgender stuff, right? And you know, he's talking about transgender shootings, like how convenient, right? And this guy's dating a transgender and has all the shit written on the bullets, the same way that the transgender that shot up the Catholic Church or whatever, right? It's just too convenient. And he gets up there, and you know, as he's talking, and right before the shot happens, the guy says, "Great," like he's signaling it out. He's like, "Great," and he taps his ears. You know, like puts both hands over his ears, like great. And you hear "stay down" right over the microphone, like literally somebody telling people to stay down, right? Get down right before it happens. It's like, you know, and just so happens you have the two guys, you know, next to him also doing the signals for the sniper and all kinds of shit. And it's like, oh, well, and it just so happens to be Tyler Robinson, but you look at the video and the guy on the roof is in tactical gear, you know? He's in tactical gear, you know? It's not fucking Tyler Robinson, and we all know it, you know? Matter of fact, Tyler Robinson's trans boyfriend, the house is vacant now that they were living in. you know. And I seen on, and you can take this with a grain of salt, but it is what it is. Alex Jones, I think it was like 2 days ago, said that his team did research on this and that Tyler Robinson was in a CIA program, right, for students. So it's like, yeah, this has fucking false flag written all over it, literally all over it. And I forget the name of the program, but it's, essentially, an academic program for the CIA, and that Tyler Robinson was in that program, so it's confirmed. He's, with CIA, Then you wonder why the FBI gets a hold of shit like this and they don't do anything about it. It's like, well, when it's an operation by your government, it's like you don't really, what can you do? And then the whole, I'll see you in Valhalla comment, like, and when he's like, oh, and 33 hours later, and he's like, and I'll see you in Valhalla, we have the watch. You look at that and it's like, okay, well, the Valhalla is like this, it's essentially Goat Island, right, in New Zealand, which is this fucking compound, marine reserve, and probably a safe house or witness protection for, the feds, And Tyler Robinson had an image of this fucking island on his computer and a picture that he had taken wearing the same, Chuck set, or whatever, or Adidas, I forget whichever he's wearing, shoes that the guy that they identified or said was him, that was the shooter, was wearing. There's just too much to this, too much to it. And it's like they can desensitize us by showing us shit like this as well. It's like, for one, whenever they, because of the nature of it, like, someone being, assassinated in front of their family, it's like, if you question that, you're deemed insensitive or, immoral or, like a bad person for doing so. It's like, how dare you, question the fact that someone died that day, How dare you do that? That young man died in front of his family, and that's a tragedy. And how could you even say that this didn't really happen? We all watched it with our own two eyeballs. It's like, well, but did we? Really? Like, did we? I mean, you could see before the event even happened, like, Kirk adjusting what looked like a fucking tube or something underneath his shirt. Something was off with that. And then it's like, well, it really, to me, it's come down to one of the two. I'm like 50-50 on either A, this was, an exploding blood squib that he had. And don't say that they don't do that shit. I showed everybody on January, it's in my private videos on Patreon, but I had showed everybody that on January 6th, they used a blood squib on that one as well. On some decent discussions I've read on Clues Forum. I've never heard of that. I have to look at that. I've never heard of that. You can drop the link if you want in the chat, but I've never heard of that. But the whole exploding blood squib, that makes a lot of sense as well, because there was some sort of explosion or some sort of action that was taking place under the guy's fucking t-shirt, the shirt came up, all of that, like, it was popped up, he braced for impact. They showed like all of the kinetic motion and the forensics, that it was all taking place locally, right under his shirt, right in this area, that was shown through AI and all types of shit. So it's like, we know that something happened there. Now, whether it's a blood squib or an exploding, lavalier lapel mic, I don't know. you know, but I tend more towards the blood squib, just to be honest. You guys remember January 6th, which now came out that there was 248 federal agents involved in January 6th. I told you guys way back then that was a, you know, a federal operation, and people literally called me a psycho. They thought I was insane and crazy for saying that January 6th was a Fed op, you know, like that was so obvious, so obvious. The police on January 6th didn't even have real badges on, guys. They literally had an entire production. They were using bullhorns and directing the crowd, you know. And there's videos of like this one woman, and it's like, serious, go to my Patreon and watch that video on January 6th, man. It's just hilarious. The woman's in the crowd and she's like, they're all actors. They're all actors. It's like she couldn't fucking believe it. This bitch came there for some real riot action, and she got there and seen that, you know, the whole shit was fake. You know? The whole shit was fake. It's like we see this so many times. It's like, when are we going to stop falling for all of this? It's like nothing we see on the media is real. Nothing we see on the television is true. Nothing we see, you know, them present to us has ever got any substance to it. Ever. Site link didn't post. But just look up the forum. Go to local. Okay. Yeah, I will check that out for sure. After this stream, I'll go check that out, as a matter of fact. That's really interesting. I'll tell you another interesting site you can go look at too, if you just want to, you know, get your deep dive on, and that is VegasShootingMap.com. VegasShootingMap.com. Go there, and I'm telling you, that'll blow your fucking mind. It's an interactive. It's like a Google map of the Las Vegas, you know, event, and it's like interactive. You can go to every single victim, where they were standing, every single eyewitness account, you know, and you click on it, and it's got links to all of it. It's whoever made it is a conspiracy god, literally. They deserve all the credit in the world. Like, seriously, I don't know who made that site, but it's fucking badass, you know. It's VegasShootingMap.com. So it's like, you know, which honestly, that was the first video I ever had that went viral. I had the image of the helicopter that looked like it was shooting a gun out of the side, you know, and which so many people during that particular, you know, event, you know, claimed that there was shots coming from multiple directions, etc. You know, it's like we see this same thing play out over and over, you know. And I said this, I think, on the last stream or whatever. It's like, you know, when they do this shit, this is like an exercise for them in a multitude of ways, right? Like, one way they're doing this, and they're, you know, it's an exercise in you know, our aptitude to be able to tell what's real, right, as a population. Yeah. You'll like it. Seriously, you'll like it. Go check that out for real. But I mean, it's like, you know, it's an aptitude test on like where the population is with all this shit. Like, you know, like in COVID, you know, with the toilet paper and all of that, right? They were able to kind of like gauge how many of us was still falling for the mind control and the brainwashing and the programming, right? You know, like who all was running out, you know, buying fucking toilet paper. It's like, yeah, they're telling you there's a pandemic taking place and you're worried about wiping your ass. You know? Because they told you to be worried about that. Because they told you that there was a shortage with that. You know? Like they were they were able to gauge who was so fucking retarded that's what they were worried about, right? They were falling for that one, toilet paper, which every time there's like a communist revolution, there's a toilet paper shortage before it happens, which I find to be strange. But we do know in gematria, toilet paper and mind control are synonymous, right? The words are. But it's like, you're getting everybody to run out, and instead of like, my device fell asleep, sorry. But instead of getting people to like buy fucking food and guns and, water and shit like that, all of these different things that are necessary, they get all of them to like go out and buy fucking toilet paper, It's like, are you shitting me, man? Literally, are you shitting me? This is what we're gonna do. We're all gonna, instead of like setting ourselves up to actually survive, we're gonna set ourselves up to have, comfortable two-ply to wipe our asses with. It's like, okay, cool. Cool. It's just like all the propaganda and shit that was on the media during the time of the vaccines and all of that, saying how it was, and I found it to be so funny too, like, how many people fell for it. For one, over 90% of every population in the entirety of the world fell for it. So if you got duped by it, don't feel like a retard. You got duped with 90% of the world. Right? So it's like there was only very few of us that didn't go for that one. Very few of us that didn't go for that. According to the numbers, according to the statistics. But it's like when you look at it though, at first it was like, oh, it's safe and effective, and it stops the spread of the virus. And it's like, oh well, it lowers your chances. Oh well, it makes it not so bad to where it won't be fatal. It's like, and then it's just like, okay, yeah. Oh, and the first one don't work. You need a second one. And the second one's not enough either. You need a booster. It's like people literally, they're so pissed that they got okie doked with the shit. It's like they're mad as fuck, like at the people who didn't fall for it. They're like, well, it's all your fault because you didn't fall for it too. It's like, no, bro. No, sorry, not going for that. Not going for that. How's that humble pie tasting now, by the way? And what's crazy is like how many, and this shows you like our nation, our world don't give two fucks about the truth either, right? Think about all the damages that were done to livelihoods and businesses, like all of that because of the pandemic. People losing their jobs and their retirements and fucking all kinds of shit. And there was, which if you think about it, now that it's been proven that, all that shit was false, and that it wasn't the way that they were saying, like all of the shit was lies basically, and a lot of we were being called, disinformation, misinformation for, you think we'd get reparations or damages paid, for that. People would be able to sue the jobs that fired them for it, or, whatnot, but nobody's ever held accountable, including the companies that created that, which once again, they had all of that laying and wait for us for years before it ever happened, Think about Moderna and all of that, and the patent with the CIA, and it's like, it's mode RNA, it's like literally software for your genetics, which everybody was calling crazy fucking, nonsense then. I don't know why my camera keeps zooming in here, but people were calling it crazy fucking nonsense then, It's always like that. It's like whenever we whenever something first takes place or something first happens, it's like we are the people that are called crazy for noticing it, you know? And then once we're proven right, it's like then it's just time to sweep it under the rug. It's like, oh, well, we've talked about that enough now, you know? We've talked about that enough now. Happy belated birthday. Well, thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciate that, bro. Thank you. You didn't call me on my birthday, bro. What's wrong with you, man? But, yeah. Anyone who doesn't question things must be under a spell, because it's so obvious that something is off and not adding up for sure. Right. It's like, and it's like, you know, at this point, you know, like, to be a conspiracy theorist, you know, and to be questioned the narrative, it's not like a question of like intelligence. It's like you're not, it's like a question of your intelligence if you're not that, right? If you're not, you know, questioning the narrative, if you're not, you know, into some sort of conspiracy, you know, and like trying to uncover things, it's like that's when we should start questioning your sanity and your intelligence, not the other fucking way around, you know, honestly, not the other way around, you know. And I find it to be just absolutely mind-blowing that there are still people left that have any trust or faith in the system. Like, and for example, and if you're in the chat, please hit the thumbs up for me, everybody watching, and share this link and all that good stuff after the video's over and all that. I don't think none of the notifications went out on this shit, just to be honest. And so I hate doing YouTube anymore. The numbers are so measly here compared to what I get on other platforms. The only reason I even do the videos is because I can download them here and post them other places, just to keep it real. But I guess I lost my train of thought. Oh, and please consider financially supporting the channel too. PayPal, Cash App, Patreon, Facebook Messenger Pay. All the links are in the description. I think I posted them in the chat as well. About $100 away from the monthly goal, so please support me. I'd appreciate it. But anyways, you know, it's like people should be questioning their intelligence if they're not, you know, asking questions. And it's like, and give you a prime example of those that don't question, that really, then it rubs me the wrong way, just to be all the way real with you. It's like, you look at like the pro-Trumpers, there is a group of them that are completely, like, they're a cult, dude. I'm telling you, it's sickening. You know, just like the, you know, people talk about how the left and liberals are like a cult, and they are, and some of them are, you know, where it's like they're totally fucking bonkers. It's like, you know, when it comes to the genders and, you know, identifying all this, like, you know, the shit's insane, you know, and we know it is. And it's like, you know, these people are fucking delusional, irrational, right? And it makes no sense. It's like they're denying the reality in front of their face. Well, you get the same thing on the other side as well, you know, in the MAGA movement. You really do. You know, people that still think, and it's like, when you're cheering on the National Guard being deployed, you know, martial law and shit like that, like you're a idiot. You know, you're fucking retarded. You know, it's like, oh, well, we need that National Guard, you know, to come in here and do this. And it's like, you are fucking retarded. You know? I don't give a fuck who the president is. You know? I'm never going to cheer on the deployment of the National Guard into our cities and the military being used against the citizens. It's like, are you fucking ate up, bro? You know? And you guys remember, and I always refer to this too, because it's spooky. The federal ICE agent that committed suicide back in 2016, I believe, on Pier 40, and, you know, always we have the occult and the numbers and all of that, but Pier 40 in New York City with a .40 caliber, right? I believe he was 40 years old or 42, one of the two. And he was an ICE agent, you know. He commits suicide and he left a suicide note, right? And you can still find it archived, you know, it's very few places. I posted it. Jesus, I don't know why this is going like that. Sorry, guys, I apologize. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. All up in my grill. But he posted a suicide note, and I did post it on my Facebook. It's been a few months ago. It was like the anniversary of it happening, and I decided to post, you know, the letter again. You know, that way people could look it up and see it for themselves. You know, and you remember he's talking about the America that he grew up in is no longer the country that he's living in, and all of this, and that they had been practicing on, you know, shooting out cardboard cutouts, basically, of men, women, and children, American citizens, you know, and that there was a coming economic collapse, and that the government knew that the economy was terminally ill, and that this collapse was inevitable. So they had been building FEMA camps and federal facilities like Guantanamo Bay, right? Which we've seen the expansion of Guantanamo Bay. I think they expanded it for like, I don't want to say something and sound stupid, but I think it was like 30,000 more people or something like that. It was like a large expansion of Guantanamo Bay, right? Which is where they, you know, they hold these, you know, political prisoners and shit like that. And that because they knew that this was happening, that essentially there would be this 0-day type of scenario that would take place in the United States, right? And that first they would do it under the guise of immigration, illegal immigration, right? That's what they would do it under. It's under the guise of illegal immigration, and that they would start deploying federal agents to all 50 states to start setting up shop. And what these feds were actually doing was, you know, surveilling and targeting and shit like that, like political dissidents and you know, people that are influential, you know, in the economy and the social hierarchy, you know. And now when they started deploying these people, they would then deploy the National Guard, right? Because of posse comitatus, they're not able to, you know, directly deploy the United States military, you know, because of that, you know, because of posse comitatus, which, you know, Space Force did allow them to step outside of that, but I believe Space Force has now been brought in under the umbrella of posse comitatus as well. So now it's just essentially like the National Guard and the Marines or whatever, right? But they can't use our military against our own citizens. So the National Guard is what they use, you know, to deploy to do that. So they would deploy the National Guard into all the major cities under the guise of like stopping illegal immigration, right? Illegal aliens. And that when the collapse happened, that one day we will wake up, basically, and that when we woke up, the ATMs and shit wouldn't work first. You would hear about a, you know, a stock market crash or whatever, and that they'd probably do it on a Friday, right? It happened on a Friday because, you know, if you do it on a Friday, you got the entire weekend, right? So it's like, ah, well, this happened on a Friday or whatever. So it's like you got the entire weekend to like delay the news cycles and shit like that, right? Delay any type of response by the government or whatever. But the stock market would crash first, and then people would, you know, not be able to access ATMs and any forms of digital money. And then after this happens, you know, because people would surely, you know, panic, when they would then dispatch hit teams that would already be in place because of the deployment of federal agents to all the major cities and population areas in the United States, and because of the National Guard already being in place over immigration, right, and civil unrest and shit like that, which, you know, take a look around you, bro. You know, if you've seen some of these fucking ICE raids, and I have, oh my God. You know, they're fucking scary, bro. They are scary. If you've seen these fucking ICE raids and shit online, I'm telling you, I feel sorry for those motherfuckers. Like I do. Like they'll be in the grocery store and shit, just shopping, and next thing you know, motherfuckers in turtle masks jumping out on them, like, you know, snatching them up, you know, beating the shit out of them right in the grocery store, you know, because they don't have any rights, you know. And it's like I watched one the other day where dude was like filming it, you know, and he's like, they wouldn't even identify themselves, right? These federal officers would not identify themselves. So they're literally pulling out a taser gun on this motherfucker they got on the ground, who's not even resisting. It's a kid. The guy don't even know what the hell's going on, because they're going in schools and doing this shit and all kinds of stuff, which to me is just disgusting. You know, it's disgusting. You know, to see federal agents going into schools, you know, and snatching young kids up. You know, it's disgusting. We should be ashamed of ourselves, honestly. I don't care if you like that or not. Fuck you if you don't like that. You know, children are innocent. They don't deserve that shit. Wait till they get out of school. You want to snatch their ass up, man. But don't go in schools and do that shit. It's fucking, ugh. Makes me want to vomit. You know? And like watching these young kids fucking flip out and cry and shit as they're being drugged through the school by dudes in turtle masks, you know? Crazy. You got a notification? Well, I'm glad you got a notification. The hive mind? Yeah, well, it is the hive mind. Like, we are fucking, you know, we are a hive mind organism, I believe, you know? Honestly. In certain aspects, for real, there is a collective consciousness, and there is like this hive mind mentality when it comes to the media and how it's programmed everybody and how they operate in society. It's like we're all little worker bees, a little ant colony, you know. But anyways, how these ICE agents, you know, you see them, they're fucking hopping out in schools and grocery stores and snatching these people off the streets, you know, which allegedly they've only gotten 200,000 or something like that. You think about a country of like 360 million people, you know. You know, and they literally released the numbers and said that over 1 million people self-deported, you know. It's like it's like, you know, you remember like the Biden unemployment numbers, you know. It's like they're trying to beef up the illegal immigration numbers to make themselves, you know, look like they're doing more than they actually are. It's like, I wish they would chill the fuck out, honestly, like, you know, because it's like you know, if you're taking out criminals, it's one thing, but when you're taking out law-abiding citizens that, you know, fucking work and go to school and don't bother nobody, it's like, what the fuck, man? You know, and the way they're doing it to them is just, it's atrocious. It really is. It's disturbing. But anyways, under the guise of, you know, the fighting against illegal immigration, right? They would be able to deploy the federal agents and deploy the National Guard and all of that. And that when all this happens and when the coming economic collapse began to happen, which you can see it's on the verge of that, guys. Like, we are there. We're very close to that. And if you don't think so, you know, look at like 2008, and it's like, you know, and this push to like lower the interest rates and all this, which is going to cause this massive rebound effect. You know, it's like we really are on the cusp. You know, our economy is incredibly, you know, it's fragile, you know, and like you could see that with like COVID and, you know, in 2008, you know, in the quantitative easing, like all of this should show you like how fragile the system truly is, you know. In my lifetime, I've seen, you know, a large superpower collapse, you know, in the USSR. I can remember that as a kid. You know, and I remember how unbelievable it was that they did, you know, at the time. You know, it's like this large world power, you know, runs out of money and implodes. You know, it can happen to any of us. And if you think about, like, you know, the way that countries like Israel and shit like that, you know, leech on us and drain us of our wealth, you know, it's like we have all these parasites feeding on us, you know, as a nation. It's only a matter of time, dude, is what I'm saying. You know, but under this guise, they would be able to deploy federal agents all over the place, which they already have, right? They already started doing that back with, like, the George Floyd shit. You know, you guys remember that? They were deploying federal agents and shit way back then. They've been setting this position, you know, or this plan into play for quite a while now. You know? And that we wake up, you know, after this collapse, first it would start with the stock market crashing, you know? And that we wouldn't be able to get money electronically, or, you know, due to, you know, or from ATMs or anything like that. And that the first thing that they would try to do is to blame it on a cyber attack, right? They'd say that we had a cyber attack from either China, Russia, North Korea, or Iran, right? One of the normal, you know, the usual suspects, if you will. You know, and if you look at, like, the tensions between Israel and Iran, right? And they've already been telegraphing something like that already. You know, they have. Talking about the capabilities of, like, North Korean hackers and Iranian hackers and cyber attacks and et cetera, right? The technological capabilities of China and Russia as well, you know, Russian bots and blah, 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 right? It's like, so they would blame, you know, that they would try to say, like, that the stock market crash and, you know, all of that was like a technical glitch, basically, you know, because that's like, and that people to stay at home and whatever, not to panic, right? But it's same shit with COVID, right? They've already seen that you would do that in an emergency situation. They've already seen that you would do that. Like I said, that was an exercise. When they were doing all this before, these were exercises to see, like, where you were at with all of this and what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, you know? And they seen that you're willing to sit right back in your home and do not a fucking thing except what you're told. You know, when shit hits the fan, or when it looks like it possibly could, you know. So, as they tell people that this is some type of, you know, cyber attack from a foreign enemy, and, you know, that's why all of this is happening, and that things will be back online, because, like I said, it would take place on a Friday. You know, that things will be back online probably the following week. It would take a couple days, right? Blah, 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 right? Feeding this line of horse shit to everybody. That way they'd be docile, calm, you know. They won't see the knife, right, to sour the meat before they're slaughtered. And that's when these federal hit teams, you know, and the actual, you know, federal agents, because of them already being in place, you know, and they had lists. You guys remember, Charlie Kirk was even on one of these lists, you know, of, like, when they were banning people off of fucking Twitter and everything else. You guys will remember, you know, these people that were listed basically as domestic terrorists, you know, political dissenters. And the first people to go, you know, they would, you know, hit the power grid on everybody. You know, there'd be an electrical blackout, power grid. You know, in which they could happen either, you know, vice versa as well. It could happen blackout first, then, you know, no ATMs or money, or, you know, crash or whatever. Or it could happen, you know, the other way around. You know, the markets crash, no money, then comes the blackout. Like, but, you know, either or is really how that could be served up, right? But in this scenario that, you know, then the blackouts come, and when the blackouts come, what it is to do is, you know, to knock all the power and the internet down, because they would dispatch hit teams to take out political targets, right? So federal agents would essentially, that were already put into place like sleeper cells in all of the cities and populaces around the nation, would then go out at night and, you ever seen V is for Vendetta? They would black bag people basically, they black bag your ass. Meaning you'd be in your house in the middle of the fucking night, probably not watching Netflix because you boycotted it for them showing trannies to children, but be watching Hulu, right? If you had a generator or something, I guess, I don't know. But anyways, you'd be chilling in your house at night, and next thing you know, they'd come in turtle masks on your ass the same way that they have all of the illegal aliens, but it wouldn't be, and some of them, it would be hit squads, to actually take people out, and some of them would be to detain them and arrest them and shit like that because they want to, maybe get them to cooperate with them, I don't know, or whatever, right? But either way, and when people seen that this started to happen, they would kill the internet because they wouldn't want people to be able to broadcast it, right? They wouldn't, if they kicked in my door or whatever, they wouldn't want me to be able to say, oh my God, it's happening, everybody, they're here, and like, look, they're in turtle masks in my living room, and they're here to take me and drag me away, or you as well, right? They wouldn't want you to be able to say that and show everybody else like what was happening, giving the heads up. That's why, the internet would be down and all of that as well. And they would take out, the top influencers, media personalities, celebrities, politicians, right? Really anybody that has like a large following or a lot of influence socially, because, think about it, a tweet from somebody, even with fucking, say 100,000 people following them, if they tweet and show that, the federal agents are like, trying to run a hit on them while there's already chaos and people can't get money and, there's a power, the grid's down and all of this, like, people would shit and that would go viral instantly and people would, instantly start preparing, panicking, etc., and try to get themselves out of the cities and all of this, which, if you guys remember, in years past, we've talked about all the different ways and scenarios that this kind of stuff could happen. Back when we do like the pole shift maps and all of that, and we talk about how and, different ways to, get yourself safe in these particular scenarios and different areas, to go. But that's why they would take those people out first, and then they would arrest all of the other ones, like gun owners, etc., right? And then that there was a kill switch in all these federal and prisons and shit like that. And in these prisons, that they would basically give the employee the call, and that when they got the call, they'd essentially flip a switch. And then when they flipped this switch, it would gas all of the inmates to death that were already in there, And the reason being, and you think about it, if it's like, Jesus, this is driving me crazy, this little Zoom thing. And if you think about it, if they gas all these illegal aliens and shit like that, like, nobody's going to give a shit, honestly. Not only would they not know about it, for one, but they wouldn't give a shit even if they did, and they wouldn't have any rights even if they did give a shit, But it would be to make room for all of the political dissidents and gun owners and shit like that, in this scenario. And imprison them. And if you remember, under Bush and Obama, they both purchased 30,000 guillotines. Which it's just something I can't get out of my mind. A lot of people are really new to all of this. It's like they've just arrived to the party of being a truther or a conspiracy theorist in the last couple years, since 2020, since the pandemic and all that, but some of us are like, we're vets, you know, we've been doing this a long time, you know. So it's like we know about all the premeditation and the plans and the purchases and all of that, you know, way before any of this ever was taking place, you know. You know about all the UN vehicles and all of that. It's like, you know, you take some of these rabbit holes and how far back they go, you know. How all the Walmarts, you know, with the FEMA Walmarts, Jesus, it's driving me crazy. The FEMA Walmarts and shit like that. Like, people don't know, you know, Janet Napolitano and the emergency crisis response with Walmart and FEMA. You know, that's why they have one of these places every fucking 10 miles, you know. They're federally funded and in connection with the feds, you know, and with FEMA. And that's why they're all set up the way that they are. That look like they have guard towers on the corners of them. And, you know, the gardening centers could double as a reception center for a jail. You know, a lot of them have underground access as well, you know. And for some people, that's too much or that's too far out there. But it's like you need to ask yourself a question. When there are disasters and shit like that, where are they housing people in a lot of these cities? And you'll find that it's these large retail centers, you know. When a place floods or a hurricane hits, it's like it's usually one of the only things that survive. It's like everybody would be in there sleeping, you know. On one of these large retails, you know. It's like people have always been worried about, you know, natural disasters and shit like that. It's like, but at this point, I think the devastation or, you know, the next big event is going to come from man, you know, honestly. You look at the Bible and the book of Revelation and all of that, and what's it kind of tell us about all of this? You know, it really describes mankind doing a lot of this in the beginning, you know. Saying that it gives a, you know, power to kill over a quarter of the earth, you know, with starvation and hunger and, you know, and famine and plague and war, you know. It's like those are all man-made things, you know. Those are all man-made things. It isn't till, you know, later on in Revelation, at the end of Revelations, you know, really like the latter seals and shit like that, that we start getting into, you know, wormwood and, you know, all of that, where shit's falling from the heavens and causing devastation, you know. Jesus, I'm so sorry about this Zoom thing. I don't know what the fuck I'm... I have to check that out. You know, but it's like, you know, I ask myself a lot of times, like, what is the next major event? Like, where are we when it comes to all of this? It's like, where are we on the timeline, you know, biblically, scripturally? You know? And it looks like as if World War III is this constant threat, but if you look at like the modern day father of Freemasonry, Albert Pike, and you know what he described in his 1871 letter to Mazzini, which was titled Three World Wars. The First World War, which went down exactly as scripted, you know, the Bolshevik Revolution and all that, right, where the Jewish Zionists, you know, massacred and murdered, you know, millions and millions and millions of Christians in Russia, which nobody talks about, you know, makes the Holocaust look like a walk in the park, you know, nobody talks about that. Matter of fact, I think Bolshevik Revolution is not even a politically correct name for it. I think you have to call it the Russian Revolution. And then World War II, you know, after this dispatching of Russia, you know, now making it this communist state, the rise of the Nazi system, right, and all of that, and the Third Reich, you know, and all of this essentially leading to the emergence of the political state of Israel. And then in the Third World War, you know, it's the political state of Israel and Zionism versus the Muslim Arabic world, right? And that's exactly what's happening. And here's what's crazy. It says that it will push us to the point of complete physical, mental, moral, and financial and economic exhaustion, right? That this conflict, that's what it'll have the ability to do, you know? And that's what it's done. Think about like the Arab Spring, think about Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, you know, the latest conflict with Iran, like all of this shit, man. You know? Like this has been going on for years and years. And think about all the billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars that have been poured into it. And it's like, and what has it done? It's like we are, you know, literally exhausted from it. Like we have fatigue over the shit. It's like there was such a pro-Israeli sentiment in the United States for such a long time. I can remember this, man. You know, that basically if you were a Christian, like part of being a Christian, like, you know, was just automatically you were a supporter of Israel, right? Because Israel was God's chosen people, you know? And like it was thought that anybody who went against Israel, you know, they would be destroyed by God. You know, so it's like that was just unthinkable, you know, unthinkable. Well, and then it's like you kind of like look at like where the sentiment is today. Not so much, right? Not so much. We don't really feel the same as we used to, do we, about Israel? You know, not at all, really, right? It's like we now see through all of that shit, and we see like Zionism is not Judaism, you know, or even close, and that you even have Jewish people now that speak out against this shit because they're tired of it. You know, when you have your, you know, Jewish people pointing the shit out because they don't want to be associated with it, you know, that's how evil it is. And that's how much damage it's done to the world. So it's like, you know, even the Jewish people are like, no, we want nothing to do with this shit. This is not biblical Judaism. We want nothing to do with this, you know? And you can't blame them, man. This is, you know, this is exactly, you know, it's like, this is what it's like, you know, with any, you know, race or people. It's like, you know, you get a few bad ones and it spoils the whole fucking bunch for people. It's like people start to, you know, because people see everything as so black and white, you know? It's like not understanding that, you know, people are so complex and we really can't, you know, we can't limit ourselves to like, you know, lumping everybody into one thing, you know, but we do. You know, and we see this pushback against a lot of things, especially here in America now. You know, politically, we see this pushback against Israel big time. You know, people just, you know, they despise Israel. They think Israel is just one of the, you know, the plagues of the world. And it's like you look at like what they've done, you know, to the United States alone, the way that they have fed off of the United States and bled us dry, you know, financially, and, you know, drug us into so many fucking wars and like lead us around by the balls politically and literally make a mockery of our political system, our politicians, and our government and our country. You know, it's humiliating is what it is. You know, in my opinion, it's extremely humiliating, you know, especially considering like they're on our welfare system. It's like, you know, we give them more money, you know, than any other country in the world combined. You know, give them $30 billion, you know, a year easily, you know, with financial aid. You know, and we allow them to be in a position to even start these wars. You know, full stop. Like, a lot of the countries that they're tussling with would blow their bitch asses off the map if they didn't know that they had the United States backing them and working with them. You know, Iran being one of them. You know, head to head, Iran would probably bust their ass. You know, truth be told. You know, and even in the limited fighting that Iran actually did, you know, in that the smaller little skirmish that they had recently, you know, when you look at that, Iran was using like ancient technology for that, dude. They were using some old shit, you know. They weren't using none of their new hypersonic shit or anything, you know. So imagine, you know, what they could have done to Israel. Imagine what they could have done. You know, and it's like the entire world is now seeing through this, you know. The entire world. You know, but I mean, you think about it, like the Bible points to all of this as well. You know, this being like the Middle East and all this being like this, you know, but Gog and Magog and all of this. You know, it's like all kind of like telegraphed as this being the setup for the last days. And like, you know, I believe that every time that we end one of these astrological ages, that this is what happens. You know, consciousness drastically increases. We increase consciously. We're, you know, knowledge increases. We technologically increase. Our lifespans increase. Our intelligence increases. All of that, you know, which I believe has to do with solar cycles, right? And, you know, it's scientifically proven that, you know, solar cycles affect human consciousness and our lifespan and the way that we age and all of that, you know. So when the sun shifts into these cycles and whatnot, and you've got to think too, I believe it's like with life on our planet is only able to deal with a 1% shift or change, you know, in the sun. So this makes it interesting. So it's like the fact that we have been around for so long and life has been around on Earth for so long, it's like it's almost necessary for there to be these cleansings of the Earth, if you will, like these, you know, these endings of species, you know. And as these species end, and I pointed this out before, you know, the shift in the solar cycle, right? The sun giving off more amounts of radiation. This radiation has the ability to mutate DNA, you know. So when we're being altered towards the end of the cycle, it's like we're being set up for the next, you know, version of humanity. You know, and you look at like all these different periods of time, Jurassic, Triassic, Cambrian, Cretaceous, all these different, you know, ages. You know, every time all the life seems to go extinct at once, right? It's taken out in some sort of catastrophe or cataclysm, you know, and then life reemerges all at once. And it's all from the same species, but different. They're all mutated, you know? They're all mutated. It's like you can see where, you can see where, you know, this is like kind of like the natural ebb and flow or cycle of things. It's like this death and rebirth, you know. It's just death and rebirth. And every time we hit like the end of these cycles and, you know, hit the end of all this shit, it's like we kind of get wonky, you know. We start acting crazy, you know. It's like technology seems to outpace where we are consciously, you know. And I don't think we survive, you know, as long as that continues to happen. Maybe we actually do outlive one of these end of the cycles when we're finally able to, you know, our consciousness is able to outpace what we're doing technologically, you know, or at least match it, you know, because as of right now, that hasn't happened. It's like technologically, we're fucking way more advanced than we are consciously, you know. We're still on some fucking fight or flight, Stone Age bullshit, you know, when it comes to consciousness. Still very, you know, primal and, you know, it's like, you know, and we like to think that we're not. We like to think that we're so evolved and that we're, you know, we're so much further as a species than we truly are, you know. But at the end of the day, it's like we're fucking, you know, we're like a couple missed meals away from, you know, devolving into a, you know, to a very different world. You know, and the reason and that's honestly, that's what it will take. That's what it will take for like real change to happen too, sadly. You know. You seem like when COVID took place, the reason that a lot of people woke up as a result of COVID or awakened as a result of COVID is because they were forced to. You know, I've said this before. It's like, you know, until it's on your doorstep, till it's in your house, till it's in your face, till it directly affects you, you know. Once it affects you directly, then, you know, then you understand it. Then it's a problem, you know. You notice nobody had issue with anything, you know, in the world. Nobody gave a fuck if there was a global cabal that was a satanic elite and, you know, trying to bring us into a, you know, a one world system surveillance police state. Nobody gave two shits about any of that, you know. Very few. Very few. Very few. And then COVID takes place and they start, you know, mandating vaccines and people carrying vaccination cards and so on and so forth. And it's like all of a sudden, you know, people see, you know, how fragile, you know, freedom is and how easily and how quickly it can be taken from us. You know? I mean, it can happen in an instant, you know? You think about like 9/11 and the Patriot Act and all of that and like how basically the world changed overnight. And the energy created by those events, you know, it's used by fucking, you know, certain groups and people, you know, for their agendas. And they're never any good for all the rest of us. It's like, how close are we to that next event, you know, the next time where, you know, something's going to take place that's going to drastically shift the world, you know. And it's like you hear people like Klaus Schwab and Yuval Harari, you know, say that the next one is going to be a cyber event, you know, and that it's going to make COVID-19, you know, look like nothing, you know. It's like you start to really... like, what would that look like? What would that entail? You know? What type of event could make that look like nothing? You know? It's like you already see the effects of that event in itself, and it's like, look how underdeveloped socially, like, the younger generation is because of that. You know? It's like their social skills and the way that they interact with the world is kind of like retarded because they were brought up in that type of atmosphere and that type of world, right? And it's like, I feel like it's retarded all of us in a certain way, in a certain aspect. It's like we become more and more disconnected the more connected we become online, you know? It seems like the more isolated we become. You know, it's like sad to say, it's like you can walk by, you know, an event taking place in the city, you know, and it's like someone's shot or hit by a car or something like that, and one of the first things that you'll notice is there'll be 50 bystanders standing around with their phones filming it, but nobody actually helping or intervening, you know? It's like we become more and more desensitized to all this shit every day, too. It's like we become accustomed to seeing like homelessness and shit like that. And because we see that, you know, we have no empathy or sympathy for those that are homeless. You know, it's like become commonplace. You know, it's like you don't feel bad for them. Matter of fact, I hear some of the most disgusting things from people when it comes to like homeless people. You know, they'll be like, fucking bum. I would give them money, but all they're gonna do is buy beer, drugs with it. It's like I just want to smack the fuck out of people I hear talk that way. You know, like most people are a couple paychecks away from that happening to their fucking ass, or a couple bad decisions away from that happening to their ass. You know, it's like they don't even understand it either. You know, but you got to think, like, we're in a generation where people were literally laughing at a man getting his head blown off in front of his family and publicly executed. People were laughing at it like it was funny, like it was cute. Like the type of human being you have to be. Hey, how's it going? Nice to see you. The type of person you have to be in order to do that, like, damn, son. Damn. You know, even if you don't like somebody, and I wasn't a fan of Charlie Kirk at all either, by the way. Like, I didn't like his content. I thought it sucked, and I thought he was a shill. You know, that's just my opinion. You know, not to speak ill of the dead, I just wasn't a fan of him at all. I wasn't. Wasn't my cup of tea, you know. He was one of those Trump apologists and shit like that, and I don't get down with that shit. I can't stand the Trump apologists. I feel like they are just ridiculous. You know, they are ridiculous. It's like those, and you guys know what I'm talking about, all those people that like apologize for everything that Trump does, you know, or try to ascribe some fucking 5D chess meaning to everything that he's doing. Like, bitch, please. You know? Like, oh no, he's doing this because he was really luring his enemies out and da 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 da. And it's like, no, the fuck he wasn't. You know, he does it because he doesn't think before he speaks and shit. He's a fucking goof. You know, he may be a smart and shrewd businessman, but it's like, that's about it. You know, the guy is but the guy is like went into bankruptcy quite a few times as well, so maybe he's not as shrewd as we think he is, you know. You guys can probably remember, I think he was like the 6th richest man in the world. He was giving like this interview about Trump in the 90s, and he said Trump was worth more to us alive than dead, right? And this Jewish billionaire, you know, and you can see why now, like why he was worth more alive, you know. He's completely done a 360 on his base, you know, and it's like everything, which every president does. Every president does. They all do the same shit. They all run on this, you know, agenda that makes you like fucking want to get excited about voting for them and, you know, getting them into office because it's like they know what you want to hear, you know. But it's like you got to look at like who's paying them, like who's funding them, like where their money's coming from, you know, because that's what's going to determine what their policy, you know, is. And anybody that's ever tried to step outside of that paradigm, you know, like JFK, has paid the price for it, you know. JFK wanted to make Israel, you know, register as a foreign lobby. You know, he wanted to take away their influence. You see what happened to him. You know. And I find it strange every time I mention Israel too, like in a lot of podcasts or a lot of streams that I do, videos that I do, people automatically tune out. It's like, like some people are so hopelessly programmed and brainwashed, you know, that they genuinely believe that, the Israel of the Bible is a political state created by Zionists in 1948. You really believe that? Like, really? You believe that it's a political state, a government, that's created by Zionists in 1948. Okay, gotcha. Makes sense. I mean, I guess that really speaks, a lot to where, Christianity and all that is at, too. The fact that people buy into that. Just like the whole prosperity teaching and shit, we've all heard that before, too, when the Bible basically tells us the opposite of that. Saying that money is the root of all evil, that they hated him first, and, they will hate you for my name's sake. It's basically saying that you basically have hardship and the world would be against you if you were following Christ, Not that you were become a multi-billionaire or millionaire and that all of a sudden you would have all of this prosperity and money and, wealth and all of this, right? Like, I'm sorry, but that's the other God that gives all that. Remember, like, the living God, the Father, he gives you your rewards in heaven. Like, you're making a trade-off, right? By living right and moral and, a healthy life, you're trading, for all your treasure in the afterlife. But we have the prosperity teaching, we have the pro-Israel bullshit, we have all of this, and then we have people that want to politicize religion as well and act like, that all Christians should be voting for Donald Trump or a Republican or whatever. It's like, dude, the only government they should be supporting is the kingdom of heaven, period. God should be the only authority that you're supporting, period. It's like when these people get behind these political movements and try to make it like, oh, Trump was chosen by God and da da da. It's like, yeah, well, so was Nimrod and Nebuchadnezzar. So was Cyrus. So just because, God allows you to be in a position doesn't mean, like, that you're going to do good in that position, or that you're a good person, or that you're here to do the will of the Creator, A lot of people have been put into positions of power and they do their own will, It's like we see that quite often, actually. It's like the only agenda that they have, is their agenda to get themselves richer, or the ones that are funding them. How many, and it's like, how long is it gonna be before people start waking up and realizing too, it's like, that the doctrines, of these churches in a lot of cases are heresies, They're heresies. This isn't real Christianity by any stretch of the imagination, not at all, actually. Not even close. Like, just for instance, Jesus Christ, I'm trying to get away from this. The Schofield Study Bible. which I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with. One second here. But Darby and Schofield, they created this study Bible, these pamphlets that came out back in, I believe it was like the, I don't want to say the decade, I think it was around the 50s, 30s or 40s, somewhere in there, but they were being disseminated. They were printed by a Freemasonic printing press, right? And actually that's how, this whole pre-tribulation rapture doctrine got started, The pre-tribulation rapture shit all got put into place and all got brought about because of the Schofield study Bibles. It's like, and people now today think like that this, that the rapture doctrine is something, biblical, or that it's been around for an incredibly long time, or it's historical. And it's like, nah, bro, sorry. That's some pretty fairly new shit, And that's actually only in America, really, You go around the world and look at like a lot of their versions of Christianity, and it does not contain the rapture. And it's like, and this is how you know that it's not biblical as well, too. It's like, because if it was, then it wouldn't contradict what the Bible actually says, It's like the Bible talks about, in the last days, how, the saints are being killed for the testimony, and all of this. And it's like, well, how can you be killed for your testimony, and for Christ if you're gone, if you've been sucked up into the sky before anything bad happened, And some of that hopium is what it is, which we know all about the hopium. People smoke the shit out of that, especially in the Trump movement. Smoking the dog shit out of that hopium, It's like, they live in this paradigm of reality where the disillusionment is real, They lied. Yeah. The second coming of Christ is about a state of consciousness that creates a new way of seeing and thinking. I would agree with that. I would agree with, Christ, Christ is a state of consciousness, but I believe he was also a physical man as well, though. So, the whole, the Christ consciousness concept, saying that, ultimately that, we have that spirit. It's, just like you can have a demon possess you, it's like, you can have the spirit of God possess you as well, too. And just like the Spirit of Christ can influence people to do amazing things, and to become better people and all of that, the same way as like demonic influence can influence people to make piss poor decisions and, fuck up their life. And it's like, matter of fact, one of the things that you see to be pretty constant, definitely constant. It's like those that have, dabbled into the demonic, Jesus, those that have, I don't know why this thing keeps zooming, sorry guys, but those who have dabbled into the demonic, especially a lot of the people that, Aleister Crowley, shit like that, like, really, really prominent occultists, that have, been involved heavily with demons and spiritism and all this, it's like one thing that we see with a lot of them is like, yes, they have these rise to fame and this vast amount of knowledge, but a lot of their life ends terribly, fucking terribly if you look at it. That's one of the things I noticed as I got into the Satanism and, black magic and all of that, it's like, I noticed one of the reasons I wanted to get out of it is because I noticed my life was going to fucking hell, I was, I myself was having, demonic, I wouldn't say possession, but, attachments for sure. Extreme attachments too, Um, a lot of the rituals, within the occult, a lot of the rituals within the occult, um, the practice of invocation and evocation, right? Uh, you're calling on these spiritual powers or principalities, right, to help guide and assist you in a lot of these rituals and magical practices, and sometimes when you do, and you're inviting them into your space or into your energy or into your body, your being, like they don't ever go, they don't ever leave, and that's kind of what happened with me. Um, and a lot of them, when you have more than one, entity up here, it can become confusing, you know. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with this. It's called shit. What is it? It's got an official diagnosis or an official name, but it has to do with the Kundalini, and it's like a form of psychosis that comes from, the Kundalini awakening experience, and I don't know what the formal name of it actually is, but I had a version of that basically take place in my life, and I tell you what, it was horrible, and I couldn't get rid of it, like, to save my life. Like, I couldn't make it stop, Once I had opened myself up, I was wide the fuck open, and I couldn't close back down, like, no matter how hard I tried, and and because of that, yes, it did open me up spiritually in ways that allowed me to have access to what you would call gifts, like gifts of the spirit or whatever. And I did have, gifts of the spirit. But with those gifts, they were like a curse as well, because just because demons are able to, like, not all demons are able to, but, some demons or spirits are able to, bring about or access parts of the mind or the psyche or, whatever that we're not able to access on our own, and they can, bring about, like, people will invoke spirits and shit to find treasures or, to tell the future or, a multitude of things, right? And people will develop, these entities for a multitude of things, right? And invoke them. And I believe it was called Le Grand Grimoire, right? It's the Grand Clavicle of Solomon. I refer to this book quite a bit as an occultic book. Like, if you're into demons, right? For you to take a look at, and this one is a heavy black magic book. This is one of the darker texts that I've ever read. And in this particular text, it talks about different ways, to create pacts with different entities, right? So you have, you can make a 15-year pact with the devil, a 20-year pact with the devil, right? Shit like that, and sell your soul. You can invoke Lucifer, or a multitude of, the different demons at his disposal, because they are in this hierarchical structure, right? They have like this militant type of structure in hell, which is crazy. It's like you would think, like, hell would be more chaotic, I guess, but I guess not. It's like hell's very organized, I guess. But in this book, it tells you it's like the rank and file, of Baal and Beelzebub and all these different entities, and and it shows you like where they rank in the structure, and it's as far as like, what you would need to invoke them and what their specialties are, and and if you've ever like the Keys of Solomon as well, right? Kind of like the similar thing, it's very similar to the Keys of Solomon, right? Where that's a demonologist book as well. Where you can like see what their sigil is, to be able to invoke them, because that sigil, is what allows you to bring them into that's like their symbol. Remember, in symbols and symbolism it's an energetic expression, and that's what a symbol is. It's an energetic expression. It's like these pictographs and hieroglyphs and shit like that, of the ancient days and shit. They would not just embody like, how a character or a letter, it's like one letter. But a symbol like embodies an entire concept, right? Not just like the meaning of a word. It's an entire concept. It's beyond. They embody the entire concept, and these sigils, they're basically like the calling card for these demonic energies, But like I said, I forget what it's called, but once you begin to, and I would love to know how many of you guys have experienced it. Jesus Christ. How many of you guys have experienced it? It's like this form of psychosis that's, and it's like people get this from doing extreme versions of yoga. People get this from, like meditating on this, but like there's different, ways to bring this on. But essentially it's like, they end up opening themselves up psychically in such a way that, they get tics in their body, like, fucking like almost like Tourette's, to where it's like they have certain tics that they can't stop doing as a result of being opened up that way, which to me, like involuntary muscle spasms and shit like that, is probably because there's like some type of entity, pushing onto something or whatever. And it's like, and a lot of these practitioners and people that are, doing, the yoga and all of these things, and these occultic practices, they may act like they're professionals or know what the fuck they're talking about, but a lot of times they don't, dude. Like they have no clue of like what they're actually talking about. They have no clue of what they're talking about, And just because something works for one person, it's not guaranteed to work for another as well. You think about it, and I can tell you just from my own like personal experience, like dabbling in that kind of shit, like it's like the Necronomicon, a lot of these different texts, especially the Necronomicon, when it talks about these old ones and shit like that, right, that can't even be mentioned by name, that's how they're described. It's like, the old ones of the Cthulhu mythos, and it's like, these a lot of people think that this shit's just like some Lovecraft stories and shit like that. No, these are founded on truth. They are founded on truth, and I can tell you right now, a lot of these Mesopotamian, ancient Akkadian fucking deities that summoning within a lot of these texts and books, like once you get them into your life, but it's damn near impossible to get some of these things out, These are spirits that are not to be toyed with, not to. It's like you got to think these disembodied entities, you know, they've been around for quite a while. You know, they're ancient, so it's like there's no trick, there's no trade. You know, you have no way of truly controlling these fucking things the way that you think you're going to. You know, it's like whenever you're like dabbling in these kind of things, like at least I thought, you know, it's like, oh, I got my magic circle, you know, I got my crystals, and I got my candles, and you know, this and that. I got my herbs. I've got all these different, you know, ways that I'm going to you know, invoke this entity, and I'm going to use it for this particular thing. And you remember like Elon Musk saying like the guy with the pentagram, he's summoning a demon, you know? That's exactly what I experienced. You know? Exactly what I experienced. More than one occasion. And a lot of times too, you won't notice what the after effects of some of these practices are, you know, right off of the rip, dude. You know, sometimes that like you know, it takes a while, you know, to really notice what you're dealing with, you know. And they can create psychosis and all kinds of shit. There's so many people that have been mistaken to have schizophrenia and all different types of ailments and illnesses that really had like different forms of demonic attachment and possession, you know. And vice versa too, you know, people that have probably had schizophrenia that thought they had demons, you know. But you know, I digress on that. I actually believe that schizophrenia is a form of some type of dissociative identity, you know. It like I believe it's got some type of demonic base, you know, in it, you know. Whether it's like a familial or ancestral, you know, curse or whatever, I don't know. You know, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I do, you know, I do believe that it does have some type of root, you know, in the demonic, you know. And a lot of demons, and like the Bible even shows us this too. Like some demons, you can't get rid of just by using the name of Jesus, dude. Some demons you can't get rid of just by using sage, you know. What's it say? Push is sus. Fuck yeah, it is. Yes, I agree. I agree. But that's what I mean, Mike. They use the energy off of this, you know, the media and shit like that. They're using the energy off of these stories, you know? Think of like the pure raw, and energy is an emotion, right? Emotion is energy in motion, you know? It's the magnetic energy of the human consciousness made manifest, you know? We are expressing, you know, that the frequencies that we are experiencing, you know. It's like sadness or happiness, and it has the same magnetic effect of like attraction and repulsion, you know. It's like energetically, like we, you know, when we're happy or excited or in love or whatever, we have a positive reaction to something, it pulls us towards that experience, right? We want to experience that, you know, more and more, which is why, you know, like you know, dopamine and shit like that, like people are so, you know, addicted to social media. They're getting like a dopamine hit. It feels good, so they're repeating the action, right? Because they're drawn towards, they're magnetically pulled towards something that feels good. Same thing with fear and shit too. Fear can be exciting, you know. Some people like to be scared, you know, so they watch horror movies and shit like that. So it's like, you know, this fascination with the morbid as well. You know, it's got a psychological effect on us. You know, it affects us psychologically. You know, we're generating, you know, this massive amount of energy. And think about it, like they had the dude's memorial in a giant fucking stadium, which is essentially a giant parabolic dish for spiritual energy, you know. Like, you can literally, it's like a giant human speaker. That's what a stadium is. It's like amplifying a big dish just to amplify all of that consciousness, all of that energy. And then they take that energy and they direct it towards, the things that they're working, whatever practices they're doing, whatever evil shit they're getting into. They take that. Same thing with like the whole adrenochrome and ritual SRA. That's why they like scare the children and shit like that they're doing that shit to. They get their their body, I guess, gives off whenever you get extreme amounts of fear, your brain starts releasing a different type of substance into your blood, and like it makes the adrenochrome, I guess, more potent or whatever. It's really crazy. And if you think about it, like, blood is our life force, right? That's why it's like everything in like Christianity is about the blood of Christ, because blood is the life. That is literally your life essence within your body. Like when people are selling fucking plasma and shit like that, they're literally stripping the life out of your blood and putting it back into your body. That's what they're doing. You're selling off your life, literally. Which I've never been a person to, to donate plasma or anything like that. I'm gonna give my life away for $50. 40 bucks, whatever. I don't give a fuck how many bucks. It's not worth it. I've done plenty of dumbass shit in my life to add that to the list. For real. And I don't know how many of you out there have ever done that, but it's like, you ever seen a person after they give plasma, it's like they're completely fucking killed. They're drained, dude. And I'm sorry, that cookie and orange juice that they're giving your ass doesn't replace probably the fucking 5 years they just knocked off your life by draining that out of you in that bag, Not hardly worth it. Not hardly worth it, But, you get people in desperate situation where they need to pay their bills or they're on drugs or whatever, like, they'll do it. Same thing with people that like sell their bodies. Not understanding that their sexual energy, it's connected to your soul, it's connected to your spirit, And especially women, it's like they literally retain the DNA of every man they've ever slept with within them, So imagine a prostitute and how much DNA she's got in her, Have a fucking football stadium worth of DNA in that bitch, So, it's like you're carrying an entire fucking nation in you, girl. You got a whole tribe, So, and it's like we create astral connections. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this. I talk about this concept, and when I talked about it, anytime I talk about something, I feel like whenever I talk about it, people look at me like I'm fucking insane. But which I am. But I was talking about spiritually transmitted diseases, because they're real, and I literally thought the shit was bullshit, until I actually had that experience, And I swear to you, dude, once you have experienced it, it will change the way that you operate sexually. I can promise you that. There are people that, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally, and I believe the person did it to me intentionally, just in this particular case. But whether it be intentionally or unintentionally, you know, there are people that literally um, transmit, you know, entities or demons through the act of sex. You know, think about like witches and shit like that. There, you know, you can curse somebody by having that type of intimate access to their energy. You know, you're giving yourself, you're creating an astral tie or an astral cord directly to that person. So it's like a feeding tube spiritually from them to you or you to them, you know. And I've heard people describe it as phase and, all different types of things. Or some type of ancestral protection, but I don't believe it is after, like, ultimately experiencing it myself and seeing it over time. I don't think so, some people just have entities attached to them, that they've gotten through some sort of sexual abuse or sexual experience, and then, that, and a lot of times that entity will feed off of like fucking, heartbreak and suffering and abuse and toxicity and shit like that. So it's like, when you get involved with somebody that's got one of those attachments, it's usually a very, very unhealthy situation, right? Whether the person is like extremely unfaithful or they're extremely abusive or extremely narcissistic or whatever, right? Like they usually will, fuck your world up, energetically. And that entity then, once you are in that state, it's like almost like a primer, if you will. It's like priming you for that attachment, because you got to think, like, whenever you're like hexed or cursed or you're dealing with like demonic energy or entities, the shit can't touch you, when you're in a state of grace. It can't. There's nothing it can do when you're in a state of grace. It's when you are not in a state of grace that it can, but it is what it is, It's like, I'm not saying what's right or what you should or shouldn't be doing. I'm just saying what is, And that's how, hexes and curses attach to people. It's like that moment that you got out of that state of grace. That's, somebody sends a demon to you, and with a, a regular spell, if you will, like, you will send that demon to a person and it may, come